Okay, so are you ready for this one? Today's deep dive, it's kind of got me spooked just thinking about it. We're talking nukes.
Yeah, it's a heavy one for
Not
sure.
just like the history of them, but like, what if?
Yeah.
What if they're in our future?
Yeah. What we're looking at today is an episode of Big Questions. It's a podcast from A Shark Podcasts.
Okay.
And they had this nuclear weapons expert on Dr. Jason Castillo.
Okay.
And this guy knows his stuff. I mean, he dropped some serious
Oh,
knowledge.
I bet. And you know me, I had to go and pull up all the source material and everything.
Mm.
And let me tell you what, this is not just some like abstract Cold War relic. This is like the real deal.
Right.
So, listener, picture this. We've got a stack of reports, articles, even like a chilling fictional scenario about nuclear war all right here,
Yeah.
and we're diving into it.
It's interesting, though, because how we talk about nuclear weapons today is totally different than how it was, say, back in the Cold War, right?
Wow.
I mean, back then it was all about mutually assured destruction, but is that still how it works? I don't know. What are the chances of someone actually pushing the button these days?
Right, right.
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, okay, let's back up for a sec. Humans have been, waging war since we were just like cave people.
Yeah.
I mean, since we figured out that like a stick could be a weapon.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And look how far we've come, right? I mean, from
Yeah.
sticks and stones to swords, then gunpowder, and then boom, nuclear weapons. The whole game changed.
Changed for good.
And to get an idea of like the sheer scale of these things, right?
Eh,
The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, that was like 15 kilotons of TNT.
15,000 tons of TNT. That's insane.
That was just the beginning.
Oh, God.
Today's hydrogen bombs, we're talking megatons,
Hmm?
millions of tons of TNT.
It's hard to even imagine.
Hard to even fathom.
Yeah. And even more mind-blowing is how we even got these weapons in the first place.
Yeah.
The Big Questions episode goes into the Manhattan Project, this top-secret program in the U.S. during World War II, to build the very first atomic bomb.
Right. And leading the whole thing was this brilliant, brilliant physicist, J. Robert Oppenheimer. You might know him as the father of the atomic bomb.
Right, right. I've heard that.
But it's a title that he came to regret deeply.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there's that famous quote from him. After he witnessed the first atomic bomb test, he said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Mm-hmm.
And that was a line, by the way, that he pulled from the Hindi scripture, the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
Yeah, and he didn't just, say that for dramatic effect.
Mm-hmm.
He spent years after that campaigning for arms control, speaking out against the development of the hydrogen bomb, which was even more powerful.
Yeah. He understood the gravity of what he had created, but unfortunately, he wasn't influential enough to stop that nuclear arms race. World War II ends, and then all of a sudden the Cold War heats up between the US and the Soviet Union, and we got a whole lot more nukes on our hands.
So how many countries today actually have nuclear weapons?
Well, right now that we know of, there are 9.
9.
9 countries: the US, Russia, the UK, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and of course, North Korea.
Of course.
Now, even though a handful of countries have these weapons, the US and Russia, they still hold a crazy amount of the world's estimated 13,500 warheads, roughly 90% of all of them.
That's a scary thought. But there's this theory, right, that gets tossed around. It's mutually assured destruction, or what they call MAMD.
Yes, MAMD. It's not just a catchy acronym, right? It was the thought process during the Cold War. Basically, it argues that just having nuclear weapons actually prevents them from being used.
Wait, so by having these incredibly destructive weapons, we're somehow safer. How does that work?
Okay, so the idea is if any country launches an attack, right, a nuclear attack, they know they're going to get it right back. And not just a little tap on the wrist, right? We're talking complete and utter annihilation. Everyone and everything is toast. Nobody wants to make that first move because, in the end, everyone loses.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense, but in a terrifying kind of way, right?
Okay.
So if this MB, this mutually assured destruction thing, is so effective, why do we still even have wars at all?
Well, because conventional wars are still a thing.
True.
Right. Even with these nuclear weapons just kind of looming in the background. I mean, look at the Cold War itself. It might not have blown up into a nuclear exchange, but it was still this powder keg of tension,
Yeah.
proxy wars and an arms race that just would not quit.
That's true.
Yeah.
I guess my biggest concern is that, as reassuring as this MA theory sounds, History shows that leaders make mistakes.
Absolutely.
You know, they miscalculate, or sometimes they just act completely irrational.
Sorry.
And with nuclear weapons, you don't get a do-over. I mean, one wrong move, one miscalculation, and it's all over.
It could be devastating. And this Big Questions episode actually mentions some really scary stories about when we were really close to accidental nuclear war.
Wait, accidental nuclear war. You mean it's not just crazy dictators we have to worry about?
Yeah, and some of them are like really close calls, technical glitches, misunderstandings, all kinds of stuff. Dr. Castillo in the podcast, he shared some really chilling examples.
So you're telling me it's not just like somebody deciding to launch a nuke,
Yeah,
but it could just happen by accident.
pretty much. One of the most famous, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will know this one, was back in 1983. This Soviet military officer, Stanislav Petrov.
Okay, yeah. It rings a bell.
This was Cold War, right?
Yep. Tensions were high between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
So picture this. Petrov, he's stationed at this Soviet early warning center. And all of a sudden, the system's going crazy, alarms are blaring, lights are flashing, the whole 9 yards. And it's telling him there's an incoming U.S. missile strike headed straight for Soviet territory.
Oh, wow. And he's the guy who has to figure out if it's real or not.
Can you imagine the pressure?
No way.
But here's the thing. Petrov, he's got this gut feeling that something's just not right. Like, he just can't shake this suspicion that it's a false alarm.
So what does he do? Does he trust his gut, or he trusts his gut, which in this case means going against orders. He doesn't report it up the chain of command.
Wow. That takes guts.
Right. I mean, can you imagine?
Thank goodness he did. What if he'd been wrong?
It's scary to even think about. But it turns out his instincts were right on the money. The alarm, it was triggered by sunlight reflecting off clouds, high-altitude clouds.
Really?
Yeah. Petrov basically saved the world from nuclear war because he trusted his gut over a computer system.
That is a story and a half.
Yeah.
It makes you think, right? Like, we put so much faith in technology, especially with something like this, with nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when those systems fail? What happens when human error is a factor?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? It's called the always-never problem. These systems, they need to work perfectly every single time we need them to. That's the always part. But they can never, and I mean never, be activated by accident.
Which, let's be honest, seems kind of impossible.
Mm.
I mean, this is complicated technology. And it's operated by humans who, well, we make mistakes.
Exactly. And to make it even more nerve-wracking, there's North Korea. We don't know how reliable their systems are, how much control they actually have. It's a wild card.
So it's all a little unsettling, to say the least. But I have to ask, what would a modern-day nuclear conflict even look like? Because this episode of Big Questions gets into this scenario, and it kind of freaked me out, not going to lie.
Oh, yeah. The one from that 2024 book, Nuclear War. A scenario.
Yes, by Annie Jacobsen.
Right. And it's important to remember it's fictional, but
Yeah.
it's definitely plausible.
Okay, well, now you have to tell me.
All right, so Jacobsen, she starts with a surprise nuclear attack on, get this, Washington, D.C.
Oh, seriously.
by North Korea.
They'd actually go for it, just like that.
In this scenario, they do. And not just any nuke. They hit D.C. with a 1 megaton thermonuclear bomb.
A megaton. This isn't like Hiroshima level. We're talking...
Oh, way bigger. Way bigger.
This is like catastrophic.
Yeah, it would be devastating. And of course, the U.S. retaliates. They launch a counterattack on Pyongyang. But here's where it gets really, really bad. The U.S. missiles, on their way to North Korea, they pass over Russian airspace.
Oh, no. This is not good.
Yeah, and the Russians, they see U.S. missiles coming straight for them.
Oh, no.
And they assume the worst. Right, they think they're being attacked.
Oh, God.
So they trigger their own automated nuclear response system. It was this chilling piece of Cold War tech. They called it Dead Hand.
Dead hand. It's like something out of a nightmare.
It's a very appropriate name because this thing was designed to end the world as we know it.
Right.
So picture this. Within minutes of that first attack by North Korea,
Yeah.
the U.S. and Russia, full-on nuclear war, and Jacobsen, she doesn't hold back. She estimates 5 billion casualties.
5 billion. And that's just like the initial blast, right? We haven't even gotten to like the fallout, the nuclear winter. I mean,
That's the terrifying part.
oh,
Even if somehow you survive those first explosions, then you're dealing with a whole other level of horror.
it's like a nightmare you can't wake up from.
Radiation poisoning, firestorms that could burn for days, and then nuclear winter.
Yeah, I remember learning about nuclear winter back in school.
Oh, yeah.
It's this idea that even if it's a limited nuclear war,
Hmm.
it could still block out the sun.
Right.
Global temperatures plummet, no crops.
Mass starvation.
It's at
Yeah.
the end of everything.
Pretty much. And with a full-scale nuclear exchange, the effects would be even worse.
Nice.
And they'd last much, much longer, honestly. There's no safe place on Earth if that happens.
Okay, I need to take a deep breath after that one. So knowing this, knowing we have these weapons that could wipe out everything,
Mm-hmm.
why haven't we just gotten rid of them? Like, we have treaties and stuff, right? Disarmament agreements?
Here we do.
Like, what's the holdup?
Well, it's not so simple, you know? The thing is, disarmament that usually happens after periods of conflict.
So we need peace to get to.
Yes.
Peace.
Yeah, basically. It's kind of ironic. It's just that countries, they're more likely to disarm when they already trust each other, not when they're staring each other down with a bunch of nukes.
Which brings us right back to Mabadi, doesn't it?
Full circle. It's like this constant push and pull. We want to get rid of these horrible weapons.
Right.
But at the same time, there's this fear that someone's going to break the rules, build nukes in secret, and then...
You'll be game over.
Exactly.
Okay, so say there was a way to just get rid of all the nukes. Like, poof, they're gone.
Like magic.
Yeah. Would the world be safer? Or would it just be, I don't know, a different kind of dangerous?
It's a question a lot of experts asked.
Right.
And have been debating for decades.
It's a tough one.
Because some people, they think that as scary as these weapons are, they actually make the big players hesitate.
Right.
Like, it's this fear of total annihilation that's kept us from having another world war.
But it's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Very delicate.
Like, we're always just one wrong move away from
Disaster. And even with nuclear weapons, we still have conflict, right? Since the Cold War ended, we've seen cyber warfare, terrorism, proxy wars.
We find new ways to fight.
Yeah, and those are terrifying in their own right, but it's different from, the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Right, right. So in a way, these weapons, they encourage a different kind of conflict, right? Something more contained.
Exactly. So in a world without nuclear weapons, maybe those other kinds of conflict, they escalate in ways we can't even imagine. Or who knows, maybe we just go back to having massive conventional wars between superpowers like we've seen so many times before.
Yeah, with all this talk about like unstable dictators and everything, it's easy to forget that the U.S., we're the only ones who've actually used nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It's a scary thought.
It really is. And I think this whole conversation just goes to show that there's so much more to this than people realize.
It's complicated.
Yeah, we're talking about complicated systems, the risk of something going wrong, and at the end of the day, human beings making decisions that could have unimaginable consequences.
And we're not always the best at making those decisions, are we?
Nope. And that's what everyone needs to be thinking about.
Well, that's a great point to end on, I think. To everyone listening, we've taken you on a pretty deep dive today into the history, the science, and the very real dangers of nuclear weapons.
We covered a lot.
We talked about this idea of mutually assured destruction, the very real possibility of accidents,
Miscalculations.
and what a nuclear conflict would look like today.
And it's a lot to process, I know.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a light topic.
But the important thing is that we keep having these conversations.
We can't just bury our heads in the sand, right?
Right.
So listener, as you go about your day, remember this. The threat of nuclear war, it's still here. And in a way, it might be more relevant now than it ever was.